Golda Meir, who would later become known as Golda Meir, was born on May 3, 1898, in Kyiv, the capital of modern-day Ukraine, which at the time was part of the Russian Empire. Her father, Moshe Mabovich, was the son of a soldier in the Russian army. He received an education at a well-regarded religious school in Slonim, located in what is now western Belarus, before training as a carpenter. Her mother, Blum Nidich, was also from the region, and the couple would go on to have 8 children, though only 3 survived to adulthood: Shana, Golda, and Sipke, later known as Clara. Golda, the middle child, was born in 1898, 9 years after her eldest sister Shana, who was born in 1889, and 4 years before her younger sister Sipke, who arrived in 1902. The family, devoutly Jewish and part of the Pale of Settlement, lived in Pinsk. This region had been established as a restrictive zone for Jews within the Russian Empire since the late 18th century, severely limiting their rights and freedoms. After Sipke's birth, responsibility for Golda's care largely fell to Shana, who was just 12 years old at the time. Golda's early life was shaped by poverty and hardship. She grew up in a household dominated by 3 generations of strong-willed women: her grandmother, mother, and older sister. These women had a profound impact on her worldview and resilience. In early 1903, Moshe Mabovich moved the family to Pinsk, where Golda lived with her Nidich grandparents. That same year, a wave of anti-Jewish violence, or pogroms, began sweeping across the region, starting with the Kishinev pogrom in Moldova. Rumors of an impending attack in Pinsk led to widespread fear. Golda's father took precautionary measures, boarding up the family's home to protect him from potential attackers. Meanwhile, Shana armed herself with a kitchen knife. While no pogrom occurred in Pinsk, the fear and tension left an indelible mark on 5-year-old Golda. Following these events, Moshe decided to emigrate to the United States, joining many Russian Jews fleeing persecution and seeking better opportunities. He traveled alone initially, hoping to secure work and save enough money to bring his family over later. During his absence, Shana became increasingly involved in political discussions with local students. They debated potential solutions to the pervasive anti-Semitism and discrimination they faced, gravitating towards socialism and Zionism. These ideological debates and Shana's political involvement deeply influenced Golda during her formative years. In 1906, Moshe, now going by Morris, had saved enough to send for his family. Golda, her mother, and her sisters made the arduous journey to join him. Using forged documents, they traveled through Vienna and Antwerp before boarding a ship to Quebec, Canada. From there, they took a train to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where they were reunited with Moshe. Life in Milwaukee marked a significant change for the family. Bloom opened a grocery store with Shana's help to support the household, while Golda attended the 4th Street School, which has since been renamed in her honor. Golda thrived in school, excelling academically and becoming involved in community initiatives. She co-founded a society dedicated to helping underprivileged classmates. At home, the family's modest residence became a hub for local members of Pol Zion, a labor Zionist organization. Golda joined their ranks at the age of 14, solidifying her lifelong commitment to Zionist and socialist ideals. Although her parents envisioned a traditional future for her, including marriage and domesticity, Golda was determined to pursue her education. Encouraged by Shana, she defied her parents' wishes and attended high school in Milwaukee. Her time there was short-lived, however, as she moved to Denver, Colorado, to live with Shana and her husband. During her stay in Denver, Golda was exposed to a dynamic intellectual environment. Her sister's home hosted frequent gatherings where socialism, Zionism, literature, and women's rights were passionately discussed. These experiences deepened Golda's political convictions and aspirations. Returning to Milwaukee, Golda completed high school in 1916. She became increasingly active in Zionist causes, dedicating herself to the dream of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Her determination to immigrate to Palestine eventually led to her marriage to Morris Meyerson in 1917. Golda's unwavering commitment to her goals played a decisive role in their relationship, as she made it clear she would only marry Morris if he agreed to emigrate with her. Despite initial delays caused by World War I, the couple finally fulfilled their dream, arriving in Palestine in 1921. Golda and Morris initially settled in Tel Aviv before joining Kibbutz Mehavia in the Jezreel Valley. Life on the kibbutz was physically demanding but fulfilling for Golda, who embraced the communal lifestyle and quickly earned respect within the community. Her leadership abilities began to shine, and she took on various responsibilities, from tending to the fields to managing financial affairs. Her dedication and natural leadership did not go unnoticed, and she became increasingly involved in the broader Zionist movement. In late 1921, Golda represented Mehavia at a kibbutz movement gathering, where she was surrounded by influential political figures. Among them were David Ben-Gurion, the Secretary General of the Histadrut, the General Federation of Labor, and leader of the Ardut Ha-Avoda, Unity of Labor, Party. Also present were Berl Katznelson, a key intellectual in the labor Zionist movement, and Levi Eshkol, leader of the Degania Bet Kibbutz. During her speech at the conference, Golda faced criticism for addressing the attendees in her native Yiddish instead of Hebrew. Upon returning to Mehavia, she discovered that her husband Morris was battling depression and malaria. Despite his condition, Golda remained dedicated to her political responsibilities and was soon chosen to represent her kibbutz at the Women Workers' Council. In 1923, as the council's delegate to the Second Histadrut Conference, Golda argued that women should be integrated into the leadership of the Histadrut rather than forming a separate women's council. This proposal caught the attention of leaders like Ben-Gurion and Katznelson. By 1924, Morris grew disillusioned with kibbutz life, prompting the couple to relocate to Tel Aviv and later to Jerusalem. While Morris appreciated Jerusalem's rich history and culture, Golda maintained her focus on the Zionist political scene in Tel Aviv. On November 23, 1924, Golda gave birth to a son, Menahem, named after her maternal grandfather. The following year, she briefly returned to Mehavia with her infant son. However, when the kibbutz members assigned her to nanny duties instead of agricultural work, she returned to Jerusalem. In May 1926, after the birth of her daughter Sarah, Golda took a teaching position at a private school to support her family. That same year, her parents moved to Palestine and settled in Herzliya, north of Tel Aviv. Despite frequent visits to her parents and sister, Golda grew increasingly unhappy in her personal life and became distant from Morris. Rumors began to circulate about her romantic involvement with other men, including David Remez, head of Solol Bonnet and a protégé of Berl Katznelson. In 1927, Remez offered her the position of Secretary General of the Women's Workers' Council to bolster the Histadrut's influence within the organization. Golda accepted the role and moved back to Tel Aviv with her 2 children, leaving Morris behind in Jerusalem. Golda used her role in the Women's Council to actively participate in Histadrut debates, which played a crucial role in establishing the foundation for the future Jewish state. Her growing influence led to her being sent to the United States to raise funds for Jewish immigration to Palestine. Her American background made her popular among audiences, and she was later tasked with building support in Britain and France among socialist organizations. Upon returning to Palestine, Golda witnessed the formation of MAPI, the Workers' Party of the Land of Israel, through the unification of the country's 2 major socialist factions. In 1932, she traveled to the United States seeking treatment for her daughter Sarah's kidney condition and to revitalize the labor Zionist movement. Over the next 2 years, Golda tirelessly toured North America, championing the Zionist cause and portraying the efforts of Jewish pioneers in Palestine in biblical terms. When she returned to Palestine in 1934, Golda was appointed to the Histadrut's Executive Council, where she oversaw the tourism sector. Despite Ben-Gurion's success in increasing Jewish immigration, particularly to Tel Aviv, which had grown to a population of 150,000. These influxes sparked riots among the Arab population. In response, British authorities imposed immigration quotas, which were seen as excessively high by the Arabs and too restrictive by the Jews. During this time, Palestine continued receiving Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi Germany after Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933. While Golda continued her international efforts as the Histadrut's representative, part of her work included assisting Jewish immigrants in finding housing and employment through the Jewish Agency, which acted as the de facto Jewish government in Palestine. When political violence erupted between Arabs and Jews in 1936, the British government sent Lord William Peel to chair a commission of inquiry aimed at resolving the Palestine issue. After meeting with Arab and Jewish leaders, the Peel Commission concluded that partitioning Palestine was the best solution, establishing a newly independent Jewish state while annexing much of the land to the Arab Kingdom of Transjordan to the east. While David Ben-Gurion welcomed the idea of an independent Jewish state, Golda Meir strongly opposed the Peel Commission's partition plan, which allocated only a quarter of historical Palestine to the Jews. At the 20th Zionist Congress held in Zurich in 1937, Golda rallied support from right-wing Zionists who rejected concessions to Arabs, as well as Jewish socialists who advocated for a united Palestine with Arabs and Jews living together. The Congress endorsed Golda's position, and the Second British Commission in 1938 rejected the partition proposals. Meanwhile, the situation for European Jews worsened following Hitler's annexation of Austria and threats to incorporate Czechoslovakia into the Nazis' Third Reich in 1938. Golda pleaded with British officials to increase the restricted immigration quota, cut to just over 10,000 in 1937, and served as an operative for the Mossadler Aliyah Bet, a secret network smuggling Jews out of Nazi-occupied Europe. In the summer of 1938, U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt convened the Evian Conference, bringing together representatives from 32 nations to discuss the plight of European Jews. As an observer representing the Jews of Palestine, Golda was outraged by the expressions of sympathy without any substantial action toward accepting refugees. In May 1939, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain unveiled a final plan for Palestine, confining the Jewish population to just 5% of the land and restricting migration to 75,000 over the next 5 years. An independent Palestinian state was to be established, governed jointly by Arabs and Jews. The Jews in Palestine felt betrayed, and Golda, alongside Ben-Gurion and other leaders, led nearly 200,000 Jews in a general strike. At the same time, Jewish communities prepared for war against both the British and Arabs, establishing settlements throughout the country. At the 21st Zionist Congress in Vienna in August 1939, as plans for Jewish resistance were solidifying, Nazi Germany signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. On September 1, Hitler invaded Poland, a country with 4 million Jews, sparking the outbreak of the Second World War after Britain and France declared war on Germany. Golda, like many Jewish leaders, faced the difficult position of encouraging Jews to join the British Army while secretly smuggling refugees into Palestine. As one of the senior leaders of the Jewish community, she served on the British War Economic Advisory Council, helping to enforce wartime rationing among Jews, and led the Histadrut's political department, resolving labor disputes. While the British sought to crack down on Jewish immigration into Palestine, Nazi forces continued to advance across Europe, occupying large parts of Belarus and Ukraine. By 1942, German and Italian forces threatened to invade Egypt and Palestine. When rumors reached Palestine that the Nazis were exterminating Polish Jews in gas chambers, Golda believed them and worked to raise funds for those under Nazi occupation. Following the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943, she offered the Haganah's support to British secret agents working behind enemy lines. After General Bernard Montgomery's victory at the Second Battle of El Alamein in late 1942, Palestine was no longer at risk of German invasion, though the war in Europe continued until May 1945 with the Nazi surrender. Following the liberation of over 600,000 Jews from concentration camps, Golda and her colleagues sought to find a new home for them in Palestine. Zionists were buoyed by the British Labour Party's victory in July 1945, as the party consistently supported a Jewish state in Palestine. However, when Prime Minister Clement Attlee and Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin sought to uphold conservative policies, the Jews felt betrayed again. Golda endorsed violent resistance, leading to a civil war between Jewish fighters and British authorities. The US was more sympathetic to the Zionists, and in early 1946, the British agreed to form an Anglo-American commission. On March 25, Golda addressed the commission, describing the persecution and terror Jews faced in Europe and advocating for an independent Jewish homeland. The commission recommended 100,000 visas for Jews, but the British refused, intensifying the conflict. After the British crackdown on the Jewish agency leadership, Golda became head of its political department in June 1946. While she struggled to balance her opposition to terrorism and her determination to resist British rule, in February 1947, the Attlee government referred the Palestine question to the United Nations. In September, the UN Special Committee on Palestine proposed partition, with Jerusalem under international jurisdiction. The Zionists accepted these proposals, though most Arab neighbors rejected them. When King Abdullah of Transjordan proposed secret negotiations with Palestinian Jews, Golda was appointed as a female envoy. Abdullah was surprised by Golda's stance, as he hoped to annex Arab Palestine, but Golda supported Jewish statehood. In late November 1947, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution endorsing partition, with Golda holding the fort in Jerusalem while her colleagues advocated for it in New York. Following Arab attacks on Jewish settlements, Golda took charge of Jerusalem's defense, exposing herself to danger while crossing Arab-held territories. In January 1948, she returned to the US to lead a fundraising campaign for the Haganah, raising over $50 million by February. In March, she returned to Jerusalem, where she helped Ben-Gurion break the siege of the city. Although disappointed not to be appointed to Israel's new administration, Golda met King Abdullah again in Amman in May 1948. She rejected his suggestion of waiting for full independence, and on May 14, 1948, Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. Among those signing the Declaration of Independence was Golda Meir, who had been in Palestine for 27 years, gradually rising to leadership alongside Ben-Gurion. After raising another $75 million for Israel, Golda was appointed Israel's ambassador to the Soviet Union in 1949. While the Soviet Union supported Israel, their backing was primarily motivated by a desire to expel the British from the Middle East. Golda struggled to gain support from the Soviet Union and faced increasing crackdowns on Jews in the Soviet Union. In January 1949, she marked Rosh Hashanah at Moscow's synagogue, where thousands of Jews acclaimed her, demonstrating support for Israel. By February 1949, Golda returned to Israel to serve as Minister of Labor, responsible for housing and employment for the arriving Jewish refugees. In the Knesset, she announced plans to build 30,000 new homes, promising to secure funding from the US. This concludes the first part of the documentary. If you enjoyed it, stay tuned for the second part. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video helpful and inspiring. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know what topics you'd like to see next.